Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with Jett Black-Maertz, who's running for Santa Barbara City Council in District 1. And today we're going to have a conversation about her platform, a little bit about her background, and all the things she wants to do if elected. So I'm so happy. Jett, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your show, excited to get my voice out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making the time. So let's dive right in. You are running for Santa Barbara City Council, which is District 1,
Yeah.
kind of the east side, essentially, of Santa Barbara, with, a little bit closer to State Street, waterfront, and that sort of thing. Tell me why you're running. Why is this the right time, the right opportunity for you to run for this office?
Yeah, so I think it's when enough people tell you you should do something, maybe they have the right idea. And so over the years, people have suggested, "Oh, you should run for something." And I'm like, "No, no, I have a family. I want to have kids. I'm really focused on my job, my career, working really deeply in homelessness." And I was like, "It's just not the right time." And finally, someone asked me. The pandemic was winding down, and one more person said, "Hey, you should run for office." And I felt, you know what? Everything feels right about this right now. This feels like the right time. So I decided to jump in.
Yeah, that's great. So we have an incumbent. We have Alejandra Gutierrez, who will be running
Mhm.
for a second term. And there are some other names out there I've heard about also running. So, what are the issues that you are going to be focused on in this campaign?
Yeah, so obviously housing and homelessness are always the perennial issue in Santa Barbara. Housing affordability is huge, and renters' rights, renters' protections have come up quite a bit. I know that the city council recently took some action on renters' protections, but I feel like it didn't go far enough. And so we really need to come up with some innovative ideas for how we can make it easy for landlords to do the right thing. How can we make it beneficial for all parties involved? And so I would be excited to get in there and start exploring those ideas, how we can make this city actually livable for the people who are working here. Also really interested in quality of life for residents, and this encompasses a lot of things. Making sure that we have adequate third spaces. Because the city is so expensive to live in, we have a lot of people living in either overcrowded situations or really small units, units that are too small for their family size. And so making those free open spaces really available and accessible to our community members so they have places to gather and places to talk and connect with each other is super important as well. Safety,
Mhm.
clearly, on the east side, making sure that we have strong community policing as well as a strong neighborhood connectivity, making sure our neighbors are connected to each other and facilitating that. And then also environmental safety. The east side is really close to a lot of flood areas, really a flood prone part of town. We have the Lagoon District, and it's called that because it was all infill from the 1925 earthquake. It really is meant to be a below sea level location. And so how do we strengthen the east side and make sure that we're ready to take on climate change as it's coming? The east side, I feel like it's on the precipice of a really amazing business development, but
Mhm.
that's going to have to be handled very carefully, making sure that it's not being gentrified, but that we're actually supporting and uplifting the really amazing cultures that we have on the east side already. And so making sure that we're empowering local residents to be able to take advantage of any business development and not be priced out of the market.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's so much. I want to go back to a couple
Yeah.
of things and kind of drill down a little bit. Let me go to the third spaces thing first, and then I want to go back to housing. What do you mean by that? I mean, I haven't heard anybody talk about it in that specific way with that terminology. What do you mean spaces for people to be and to gather?
Yeah, so first space would be your home. This is the place where you spend a majority of your time. Second place being your office, where you go to, or your office or your place of business, where you're spending your working hours. And then third spaces are anywhere in between. Where are you going to have a picnic? Are you going to the beach? Are you riding your bike? Are you meeting up with friends at the park? So these places that are neither home nor work, but places that people access to actually build that sort of community. So I know one of the big issues on the east side is the renovation for the East Side Park.
Mm.
It is gorgeous. It is such a beautiful place. They have amazing trees, a really great play structure. But after the renovation, what's missing? all of the picnic tables. There's no more picnic tables, and there's signs up saying don't play soccer here. So what are we supposed to do with that space? It almost felt like it was pushing people out from gathering there rather than inviting them in. And so we need to have more of a holistic community planning to make those free open spaces more accessible to people who don't have the space within their homes to gather.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and it's a really depressing situation when you look at some
Mhm.
city parks, and there's been a little bit of a shift toward privatization of them. Talking about
Yes.
Veracruz Park, and I know that trampoline business is a great business, but there's a big fence around it, and you kind of can't go in unless you are part of that experience, or I think they'll let you in, but whenever you see fences, it's a barrier. And then on the Eastside Park, how can you take benches and say no soccer to a community
Right.
that may not have backyard space and who relies on that as their backyard? And then, of course, soccer is so much fun for so many people. So, and we see a little bit of that happening with the city and the Parks and Rec Department. On the issue of housing, and you talked about tenant protections. There's been this whole thing regarding rent evictions. Of course, there's the big one that was in Isla Vista with Core
Mhm.
Spaces purchasing that building, but we are seeing it in Santa Barbara to a much smaller degree where you have property owners purchasing buildings, wanting to redevelop them, and then who gets lost is those current tenants. And they will say that the conditions are really shabby, and we kind of all know that. Like Santa Barbara's got a very old housing stock. That's
Yeah.
one of the things people complain about, yet rents are so high. And so they want to renovate. And then, of course, when they renovate, it's going to be more expensive and it's harder for those people to come back in. What is your thoughts on the whole renoviction debate? And how do you balance the needs of developers who are trying to do a good thing, which is improve the housing supply and stock, but at the same time, we don't want to see residents displaced. These are their homes and they may not be able to pay those rents later. How do you balance that whole situation?
Yeah, I come from the opinion that housing is a human right. It's something that should be a right for everybody to access affordable housing. And so just that space level where I'm coming at this conversation from. It's also necessary for landlords to make money. That's why they got into the business. The commodification of housing, actually tying someone's income to another person's housing payment, has gone a little too far in our city. I think there's the idea that landlords are able to make a decent amount of money. Of course, they should. They own the property. It costs a lot to maintain a property. But when you're charging a rent that the average family simply cannot afford, based on economics, any economic survey you look at, most families cannot afford to live in this city. Something has gone too far and it needs to change. I think it's the responsibility of government to say, this is hurting our citizens. This is hurting the people within our community. How can we help both the landlords make sure that they're recouping any money that they're putting into their properties, but also make sure that we're protecting this right of people to enjoy their housing, to live in their housing, and to be able to afford their housing, not be so rent burdened that they're making the choice between, do I pay for childcare or do I pay for my rent?
Yeah.
And so how do we figure out what is the balance we can strike between those two groups?
Yeah, so I imagine you're obviously very in support of the tenant displacement ordinance and offering relocation fees and expenses and all of the things the city has done. One of the things that's still on the table is this issue of a rent cap or rent control, and Council Member Kristen Sneddon has been very vocal about that. And so I wanted
Mhm.
to ask you, I mean, are you supportive of a rent cap? What percentage, if so, or what is your solution to that issue?
Yeah, I would be in support of a rent cap. I think it is something that has gotten out of hand. I wouldn't want to put a percent out there without meeting with all of the parties in a single room, right? Very similarly to how we have labor negotiations. You have the workers and the employers and a moderator within them in the room together having these conversations. And I think we need to have the same approach to a rent cap. What would be sustainable for landlords and what would be affordable for the tenants? And how can we meet in the middle?
So I should back up a little bit. You work for Santa Barbara County and
Mhm.
you have an expertise in dealing with the unhoused, homeless. And so, can you talk a little bit about your current role and your job and how that insight, that expertise, that viewpoint would help you as a council member in addressing some of these challenges related to the unhoused and getting people into housing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first job, my first professional job out of college was actually at Transition House Family Homeless Shelter. And so that was my, first step into the world of unhoused people. If homelessness was people with children, was families. So it wasn't that, person living on the street, possibly struggling with substance use or a mental health issue, but families who are experiencing homelessness. And so I really got to see the humanity of the people who are in this economic situation. I think that the Eastside having three of the biggest homeless shelters in the city, it's important to have someone in there who does have that expertise with homelessness. It's a multifaceted issue. I think there's a lot of focus put on the people that we see actually on State Street or on the waterfront. However, it's pervasive throughout our community. Something that we've seen over the past few years is the number of people who are experiencing homelessness for the first time is increasing. That number is going up. And so it is a homelessness issue, but more than that, it's a housing issue and it's an affordability issue. When you see an increase in people experiencing homelessness for the first time, paired with an increase in the number of people that are living in their vehicles, there's something broader at work. It's not just, oh, that person doesn't want services. It's no, we have families, we have young people, we have grandmas and grandpas that are falling out of their housing because they can't afford it anymore. And so how can we take a step back, one step back further and say, the people who are at risk of losing their housing, how do we support them? And I think that's going to trickle down into actually decreasing the number of people who are experiencing homelessness on the whole. And when that happens, we can really start focusing on those that are a little bit harder to house, those with persistent mental illness, those with substance use disorders, those people that just can't quite fit into a housing mold. And so once we're able to stop that inflow, we'll really be able to focus on those people that are more visibly homeless.
Wow, okay, really, really cool. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Transition House. That was your
Mhm.
first job. So
Yeah.
this is the place on East Coda Street, right? Or it deals with
Yeah.
families and they have
Yeah.
a nursery
They're,
there. And what was
mhm.
that like? Can you walk us through what you saw, what you experienced? Because I think that many people unfortunately think of the unhoused as the people you might see on a street corner or on State Street or something. But talk to me about, what you saw with these families when you were working there.
Yeah, something I think that's really shocking to people is if you have a child in public school in Santa Barbara, I can almost guarantee that there is a child in their class who is experiencing homelessness, whether they're living doubled up or they're living in a car. It's a demographic that's growing is families with children who are experiencing homelessness. And these aren't people who, are uneducated or they're coming from the area for other reasons. These are people who lost their housing within the city of Santa Barbara. These are people with college degrees that for one reason or another simply couldn't maintain their housing. It really brought it home to my own housing insecurity that I experienced in my teens and 20s. We've lived with family members, we've moved houses a lot, and it is really unsettling and it does make it difficult for a child to be successful in school. Transition House recently, until Storyteller took over their infant care center, actually allowed spaces for community clients to come in. And so it was a really amazing model. They had kids from the shelter within their child care center. They had kids, low-income kids on subsidy within the child care center. And then they had what they called community pay clients. And I actually put both of my babies through their infant care program as a full pay community client, just because of the amazing work that they're doing with social emotional development and making sure that these kids who could be going through the turmoil of losing their housing still have that safe, secure place to live. And so I think we really need to consider the emotional impacts of homelessness at every stage of life, whether that be a baby who is with a family who is unhoused, or an elderly person who's possibly been housed their entire life, but can't maintain that housing. And then on top of that has all of the medical issues that come with aging. So we really need to treat it as a whole person issue, not a you did something wrong to get here issue.
Okay. And then on the other end, did you go out on those point in time walks? Was that part of your job? Did you get out at 4 in the morning or whatever time it was and see that? Can you talk a little bit about our population that lives, you know, in the bushes and under bridges and all of that? What's that been like? Because I think what's interesting about your candidacy and you as a person is that you're not talking about these things on the theory level. You've
Mhm.
experienced it in your job, and it sounds like, in your younger years as well, that you experienced some housing insecurity. What's it like to be out there at the point in time? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a really amazing experience to organize the point in time count. I've been organizing it since 2019, and then really heavily since 2020. And I did participate in the early 2010s as well when I was with Transition House as well as Habitat for Humanity. It's an interesting group of people to bring together. You have people that are homelessness service providers they're in the work every day showing up to count. And then you're pairing those with Westmont College students who may not have any contact with people experiencing homelessness in their day-to-day life. And then we also have people with lived experience of homelessness who come to volunteer. And so we're bringing all of these groups together and saying, now go out and actually interface with people that are sleeping on the streets. It's not just a count of people. We really encourage volunteers to go through the survey. And this is how we collect a lot of the valuable demographic data. Where did you sleep last night? How old are you? How long have you lived in Santa Barbara County? And so it's causing them to go out and understand that it's a person who's sleeping under that underpass. It's not just a pile of blankets with, a human being under it. Who cares? It's a human being who has a history and a past, and they want someone to talk to about it. Um, what I found really moving once, we had a guy who had lived experience of homelessness. He was helping volunteer. At the end, he came up to me and he said, "Thank you so much for giving me this volunteer opportunity because now I feel like I've given back for everything that I've received." And it's like, wow, there's there's a recognition that the community is working really hard to provide services, and this person felt so moved to come and actually give his time back for the services he'd received. And so I thought that was just absolutely incredible. So I think, a little plug, if you're ever able to participate in a point in time count, please come out and do so because you'll meet people that you never would have chatted with in normal life. And we've had lots of people, we've had mentorships form between older people and younger people. We've had friendships form. It's just a really amazing experience.
Yeah. Okay. A couple more questions on District 1 issues, and then I want to go into your background and sort of how you got to this place in time. When I'm on the east side, one issue is parking. Obviously, we know that families double, triple up in a lot of homes, and so they share these living spaces, and they have cars, and so it's difficulty to park anywhere. Which, when you have cars, you come up with, or you create a situation where it might be unsafe for people on bicycles or pedestrians. So, what are your thoughts on circulation and transportation and the densely populated neighborhoods of the East Side? How do you sort of solve that situation, or at least try to work at it a little bit?
Yeah, so I think we need a little bit of a hearts and minds campaign over here. Santa Barbara is a big little city, right? Like it's easy to get from one side of the city to the other in a car, but it takes a little bit of effort to do it via bike or public transit. The dust is still settling from the installation of the Alisos bike path, which is really amazing if you're trying to navigate through the east side. But there's still connectivity issues between the east side and downtown. We have that really great class 4 bike lane that goes down Coda Street and then it stops 2 blocks before it gets to State Street. So there's still that block there. Um, there needs to be a little more thought put into the frequency of public transit, how we're getting people throughout the city, really making sure that we're focusing on how people can get to where they're going as quickly as they possibly can. Obviously, that's not going to solve the car issue, especially with, restaurant parking. I was up in the Spring Street area talking to some neighbors, and one of their major complaints was parking. A lot of people go to restaurants along that part of that part of Milpas, and they'll be parking on Spring Street. And so there does need to be a little bit of a preference given to people who actually live in the area versus people that are accessing businesses. And so
Mhm.
I think with the amount of thought that we've put into State Street, very little thought has been put into the Milpas Street corridor. And so really elevating that and visiting that, and how do we get people around the East Side area and then also connected to downtown so they don't feel like a car is their only option.
Yeah. Yeah, and lighting is an issue on the east side, and I know it's gotten a little bit better, over the years. But what about you? Do you go on walks at night? Are you coming home at night? I mean, I always feel that it's dark. It's dark in certain parts of those neighborhoods, which is a safety issue. Uh,
Mhm.
what can you do to sort of address, an increase in lighting, either on the street level or the high street lamps, to make things more, seemingly more safe?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another thing that I heard as well when I was out talking to neighbors is the lighting and making it difficult, especially during the winter. We have such mild winters. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to go out and walk at 6 o'clock at night, except that it is very dark. So figuring out how we can enhance lighting for safety, but also just to make it more of a friendly, connected neighborhood, right? Like if you can see where you're going in the nighttime, you're more likely to be outside and again, accessing those third spaces. The Aliso's bike path, they have installed lights along there, and it is very bright. It is nice. It's nice to travel at night, but it is very bright for the people that are living along that space.
Yeah.
I think more community outreach is needed. I think we need to revise how we're actually alerting the community to outreach events that are happening. I hear a lot of, well, the city never told us about that. No one ever talked to me about that. And so there is a disconnect in communication there as well that I think will go a long way to solve these problems like parking and lighting. How do we get a council member who's actually connected to the community, who's actually willing to go out and talk to people and hear the concerns of the community and then bring that back to staff rather than waiting for the community to come to them during council meetings or complaining to staff members who don't need that extra little bit of, complaint on their desk when it should be the responsibility of the council member to field that.
Okay, cool. Let me ask you a kind of a tough question here. Um, we have an incumbent, right? Alejandra Gutierrez is the representative. She won by 8 votes when she ran against Jason Dominguez, as she unseated an incumbent. And now she's running for re-election. So now she's in the spot of trying to hold on to her seat. Obviously, you're running because you feel as though things could be different or better. Other people are running because feel the same way. Um, how would you rate or evaluate the performance of Councilmember Gutierrez during her first 4 years?
I would say that if I felt there was adequate representation of the East Side, I would not be running.
Mhm.
So I think everyone gets into politics and local governance and public service for various reasons. And I think it's a great experience for someone to have, but I also think it's good to have the self-awareness that it might not be for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear, right? That's an honest answer. Appreciate that. One of the things that I have heard come up is, we have district elections, and the East Side is a largely Latino, Hispanic population, and I don't know the specific demographics, but I know that it's the East Side and the West Side. We have a large Latino population. And we have one of the reasons we moved to district elections was to increase the representation of Hispanics on the city council. And so we've seen that, right? We've seen Oscar Gutierrez on the West Side. We've seen Jason Dominguez. We've seen Alejandro Gutierrez. Um, and one of the things I've heard is, oh, Jett's great. Jett's amazing. She's so qualified, but does she look like the district? Does she represent a majority of the district? And so I just want to put that out there so you can address that. For people who might be thinking we need to vote for somebody who's Latino, Latina, Hispanic for this position because it is majority that in the district. How do you respond to that? How do you address that?
Mhm. So I'm born and raised Santa Barbara, and I've lived on the East Side since 2017. So I'm not a newcomer to the district. It's not a surprise to me that me not being Latina is an issue.
Yeah.
That being said, I can't help but be slightly offended at the fact that me not being a Latina would pre-qualify me from being a qualified candidate.
Mhm.
I know the community, I know the issues, I know my neighbors. I've been out talking to people, I've been out talking to businesses. Yo puedo hablar un poquito de español y envío a mi hijo a una escuela donde enseñar en español. My Spanish is not perfect, but it's enough that I'm able to connect with my neighbors. So I think that it is a little short-sighted to say, well, she's not a Latina, so she couldn't possibly represent us. I feel like I do have an awareness of the issues. I do have a love of the community. I do have a desire to preserve the culture of the community. There's a reason I live on the East Side. I love it here.
Yeah.
So I recognize that, and I will do everything within my power to make sure that I'm representing the Latino population over here as well as the entire population over here.
Yeah, no, great. I just wanted to put that question out there because, that's what people will bring up. And in a campaign, uh, people throw everything against the wall and
Yeah.
hope that it will stick, especially if they might be fearing that they're not going to get reelected. So I just wanted you to address that on its own. Let's shift a little bit, okay?
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about your background and where you've worked, because I hear you talk and I get a sense of you have a lot of experience, a lot of breadth, a lot of knowledge about how things work in Santa Barbara, but also bigger picture perspective. And I think sometimes that's the best of both worlds, right? We want the local expertise, but we want people who've seen how it works elsewhere and trying to combine all of that. So can you talk to me a little bit about your background and where you went to school, your jobs, and your major experiences?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Santa Barbara. I went to Santa Barbara Junior High and then Santa Barbara High School. When my parents got divorced, we moved up to the Santa Ynez Valley, and so I did do 2 years at Santa Ynez Valley High School. And then we moved to Atlanta to be closer to my mom's brother. And so I ended up finishing high school in Atlanta, and I went to college out there, which is an amazingly large city, a huge melting pot, really racially diverse. Some amazing talks that came through there, really great art, great food. It's also not my home. So I came back to Santa Barbara once I finished college because this place just keeps calling me back. I was here where I got my job at Transition House. And then from there, I went to Habitat for Humanity back when it was in Goleta.
Oh,
And
no.
I worked as their volunteer coordinator, as well as recruitment for the families that now occupy the 12 homes on Canon Perdido Street. So I was there for the groundbreaking and the family training and everything for that. And so that was really amazing. I moved up to Portland, Oregon for 3 years for my husband's work, and I worked for Habitat up there as well, which was a completely different ballgame. They're building between 50 and 100 houses a year, and it is a refugee resettlement site. And so I had people from all over the world coming, and it was one of my responsibilities to teach them what an HOA is and what is a mortgage and how do we actually run this in the United States and how can you be a successful homeowner in this completely multicultural neighborhood that we just built. And so a lot of learning there, a lot of really amazing experiences. But like I said, I can't stay away from Santa Barbara for too long. So I came back here and started my family here. And so I've been laying low since the pandemic, but I have been working for the County of Santa Barbara since 2016. I started in capital projects for low-income housing and community development block grants. And then I moved over to homelessness in 2019
Mhm.
in 2019. And so I've been working directly in homeless services countywide since 2019. So I have an awareness of all of the shelters and everything in the city of Santa Barbara, but also what's going on countywide, what's working in Santa Maria, what's working in Carpinteria, what is Goleta doing? And so having that bird's eye view of how different communities are trying to tackle the homelessness issue, I feel is a huge asset as well.
Yeah. I'll spare you the question about the county's housing element and rezoning agricultural land. That's a different podcast. So yeah,
Yeah.
so you have all of that sort of expertise coming in. Talk to me a little bit about some citywide issues. State Street, right? So obviously housing is the most important thing that anyone can be talking about right now. But
Mhm.
State Street is this economic sort of engine, historically has been, and everyone has a perspective and an opinion. We closed it to cars after the pandemic, and so now it's sort of part of it, like 9 blocks, and part of it people really love. Some businesses say this is terrible. We need cars, and there's that whole debate. Meanwhile, there's a State Street master plan where they're talking about what it might look like, and that's
Mhm.
years away. Funding's a question, all of that. When you go downtown, right? What is your view for what an ideal State Street should look like? If you're on the council, you'll be making these decisions. So talk to me about your vision for State Street.
Yeah, having grown up here, I remember having the conversation in the mid 90s about should we close State Street? I was, in my preteens, but still, it was like my friends and I were like, are they going to close State Street? And the grown-ups were talking about, should they close State Street? And we're 30 years on, and it's like, oh my gosh, we finally did it. Why are we talking about opening it again? This has been such a long time conversation about closing it.
Mhm.
Um, the way it was closed because of the pandemic was very piecemeal, right? It was everyone was in a panic. We had to do something. We had to save these businesses. We had to keep people safe. Shut it down. We're far enough away now that we need to have a firm plan of how are we going to move forward and make it successful. I don't think we should be opening State Street to cars. I know there are a couple vocal businesses, but most of the businesses I've talked to are really happy with the amount of foot traffic. You know, you go down there, not just on farmers market days, but any day, and there's a lot of people walking around. It's great people watching. We live in Santa Barbara. People come here because it's beautiful and the climate, and then we're making them eat inside. That doesn't make much sense to me. We should be taking advantage of being outside and figuring out how we can make that a really nice space. I was in Ventura this past weekend, and it got me thinking, you know, walking down Main Street, aren't there a lot of vacancies here? Why is every business full? Every business is open unless they're clearly remodeling. What is happening on State Street that's making these businesses be empty? If there's a community close by that's able to solve this problem, yet somehow we can't figure out how to get people renting those and supporting local businesses, getting local business owners in there, we really need to take a deep dive look into that. It's not a car issue. It's not a foot traffic issue. It's an economic issue.
Yeah. You know, when I talk to business owners, and what part of my job as a journalist is writing about business, and I have commercial real estate sources and business sources. You know, they talk about, and I'm not talking about the Jim Cannells, like the extreme people, right?
Mhm.
And I like Jim and all that, but obviously he's got a very strong viewpoint, and there are people like that. I'm talking about just like some people who own businesses and who own or who manage property. You know, they say things like, "There's a lot of people on State Street, but they're not holding shopping bags, right? They're not
Mhm.
shopping." And there's this sense of the restaurants are doing a little bit better than the retail shops. And so I'm wondering how you sort of push for a State Street that is continually closed to cars, at least, you know, a few blocks or 9 blocks, whatever it's going to be, but also assure some of those retailers, some of those property managers who have vacant storefronts, that this is still the best way to go. How do you navigate that space and sort of kind of make everyone happy?
Yeah, I think again, we can go back to the connectivity. Where is the highest concentration of hotels where people would stay if they were to visit Santa Barbara? That's the waterfront. How do people get from the waterfront up State Street? We're in the process of revising the State Street underpass, which I think is amazing, but there's no way for someone with mobility issues or someone who doesn't want to ride a bike or someone who doesn't want to walk to get up State Street, short of doing an Uber. So I think we really need to look into investing some sort of small transportation, some sort of people mover situation to get people from the high concentration tourist areas onto the State Street area, really funnel people to those shopping areas. And so they're accessing all of those shops. I think we are going to see a big change if the Paseo Nuevo project is able to move forward with
Mhm.
affordable housing. That's going to get people living there. I think it's also going to usher in a change of what kind of retail shops are there, right? People who are living somewhere purchase different things than someone who is coming to visit there. So I think, how do we get more people downtown, whether that's through people movers or through residential development? And I think those two things are really going to support the retail businesses downtown.
What do you think of our public transportation system and MTD? You know, we used to have a waterfront shuttle that
Mhm.
went away, city stopped funding it, and then MTD eventually dropped. I do believe they're planning to bring back a form of a shuttle at some point later this spring, and like I said, trial, not on state, but around state.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, I guess I hear people talking about circulation and all that, but a lot of times MTD gets lost in that conversation. What do you think? What role does public transportation play in all this?
I think it could play a larger role. And like you said, I think you said it perfectly that MTD has gotten lost in this. Um, yeah, we have a transit system. What do you know about it? Not much. I
Mhm.
think we do need to make it more tourist friendly and more locals friendly. You know, you have the people who ride MTD religiously, and then there's people who are like, it's not even an option. It doesn't even cross my mind as something that I would want to do.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at frequency. I think we need to look at routes. I think we need to look at the number of stops. And I think we also need to look at the size of the buses. Do we really need, is our city large enough to support those large buses? Do those buses really get full? Or could we have a more frequent transit system with smaller buses that are running through? So I think integrating that into state street planning, but also just community connectivity planning as well is really important.
Yeah. I think the UCSB to City College, those buses are
Those
full.
are
Isla
full.
Vista,
Yeah,
but we're talking about like the urban downtown part, of course. You
exactly.
mentioned Paseo Nuevo, so I want to just kind of follow back on that. Um, Obviously, the city wants to build housing there. They want to work with the investment company that owns the mall and a developer. There's a little bit of tension there over this
Mhm.
issue of affordability because everybody wants not a whole bunch of market rate units. And La Cumbre Plaza, they proposed 8% of below market rate, which is just almost laughable that anyone
Mhm.
would think that was a good idea with that low. Any housing advocate would think that was a good idea with that low of a percentage. And in Paseo Nuevo, that's the debate, right? The developers
Mhm.
like, this is downtown. We have a failing mall. We need as much market rate as possible. What is your view on market rate versus below market rate, very low, low, moderate income? What would you push for in Paseo Nuevo as far as the percentage of market rate versus non?
Yeah, I think affordable housing has become a dirty word. I think it is, people don't like to think, oh, affordable housing in my neighborhood. But affordable housing is affordable for someone who's making a six-figure salary. It's not, affordable housing like you would classically think of it. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of a mental shift around what is affordable. I think that the city has been really remiss over the past, couple of decades, really, in not developing firm policy on how we deal with developers and things like this. It's not fair to the people and it's not fair to the developers to come in with plans and say, this is what we want to do, and have the city hem and haw and be like, I don't think that fits this and that. We need to have more firm policies of, if you're building, 10 units, it has to be 20% affordable. If you're building 20, some sort of standardization of the percentage of units that have to be affordable, that's non-negotiable. I think without having that, we're going to have a lot of angry developers that are coming in thinking they're going to be able to cash in on their property and then be like, oh, wait, you didn't say anything had to be affordable. So I think that would go a long way in making these conversations a little bit friendlier with developers.
Mhm.
Um, I think we need to support our local workforce. We need to look at what the average wage of someone working in Santa Barbara is, and then build a unit that they would be able to live in comfortably and still be able to afford food and childcare, and quality of life activities. So I think that needs to be the standard for affordability. Not, oh, well, you did 5%, you did 8%. No, it has to be a majority of the units have to be accessible to the people that are living in the community.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see
Which
how that
no
goes.
one's gonna like hearing that, but
Yeah.
but I mean, we have people that are living in Lompoc and Santa Maria and Ventura, and then they're coming here to work in our restaurants and to work in our city. There's people who work for the city who can't even afford to live here. So how do we make it so workers are able to live where they work?
Right. Yeah, that's the key. Closer, and that's one of the things like Goleta is such a job hub now, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the housing proposed out there. And Goleta has built housing. And Santa Barbara's a little different, sort of built
Yeah.
out, but these are issues that people are wrestling with for sure.
And it's hard because Santa Barbara's landlocked, right? We have the ocean on one side, the mountains on the other. We have that pinch point at Gaviota, and then we have Rincon that we can only get so big in our South County down here. And so how do we make it so people are able to actually live in this place that's very limited in space?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jet, I want to wrap up, but I want to kind of give you a opportunity to like bring up anything I didn't ask you about. There's so much obviously in the city and on District 1. But I mean, is there anything you want viewers to know, listeners to know about your platform? As you're about to, it's about to get really thick and heavy really soon, now that the
Yeah.
primary's over. Like, I imagine you've got to start fundraising and getting endorsements and doing everything if you haven't been doing that already. So, what do you want people to know that I didn't ask you about?
I think I will be approaching this with the mindset of I want to be the mouthpiece for the community. I'm not in here to push my own agenda. I'm in here to use my skills to enhance what the community is looking for. So you can find me on Instagram at Jett Black, the number 4 SB. I encourage everyone to, reach out to me. Let me know what's going on the East Side. So when I do come into this position, I can come in prepared. I want to be plugged in. I want to know what's going on in the community, and I want to be able to respond to concerns quickly. So I'm trying to be as accessible as possible, and I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any suggestions.
That's great. And I just need to ask you, your name is so like amazing and memorable. And so can you talk about the origin of that name? It's a unique
Yeah,
name. So how did that happen?
it was a joke. Um, My dad has a really great sense of humor, and that's why my mom married him, so she ran with it. I was born at Goleta Valley Hospital, and they didn't know what they were going to name me. And the hospital was kind of discouraging people from taking home babies without names, because then you end up with baby Black, who is 4 years old now.
Yeah.
And so they kind of went back and forth. My dad was like, let's just call her Jet. And my mom was like, okay. And so it's not a family name. It's not a short name. It's not, it's just my dad makes jokes and my mom runs with it.
So, most of your life you were just jet black, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, how did people, I'm sure it went from teasing to admiration, right? But,
Exactly. Yeah.
growing.
I was called Airplane a lot in elementary school. Wasn't super fun, but then once I hit high school, people were like, "Oh, wait, that's kind of cool."
Yeah,
So,
it is a
yeah,
super
I
cool
don't mind
name.
it now. I don't mind it. Yeah,
And
thank
running
you.
for office, it's a really cool name because, people are going to remember that when they go to vote. So,
I hope so. I
your
hope
dad was
so.
thinking of you a long time ago. So anyway, Jett Black-Maertz, I really appreciate your time and
Yeah, thank you.
sharing with my audience what you're thinking about and your vision for Santa Barbara. So we'll be talking a lot more in the next months, ahead. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Josh. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, take care.
Yeah, you too.